Welcome to a one-off special edition of the Ministry Shift, which is a program we began during the lockdown, during COVID, and has since gone into abeyance, but it felt that this was the right moment to resurrect the format and just to think a little bit about ministry at a time of very, very significant change in our national life as we mourn the death of Queen Elizabeth II and as we look forward to the reign of King Charles III. It's something that's been in the planning for a long time, not that we particularly wanted to think about it. We perhaps hoped it would never happen, but it certainly has now. And of course, many institutions, organisations have tried to respond to the national mood and to help people understand the significance of these events, not least, of course, the Church of England. So how are we ministering into this extraordinary historical moment? Well, to answer that question, we have got three wonderful guests. I'm glad to welcome David and Chris and Sarah, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and then perhaps just say a little bit about what they've been up to in the past 3, 4, 5 days as we've been marking this moment. So let's start with you, Chris. How have you been in Shifnal dealing with it? Tell us about yourself, where you are.
Yep. So I'm Vicar of Shifnal, and we've, I suppose, dealt with it in quite a civic way. So working very closely with the town council and with other community groups. So church has been open throughout the period of mourning for people to come and lay flowers, light candles and sign the Book of Condolence. And there have been hundreds of people through, which has been really encouraging. We've tried to have folks from church there to welcome people, to pray with them, to listen. Lots of people, we've been touched by the number of people coming with deep emotion response. We had a big service on Sunday morning and had the mayor make a speech at the beginning of it. The Deputy Lord Lieutenant came and led the prayers at the beginning. And we had about double our usual number of people, so 160 or something like that. It was really encouraging.
Thank you, Chris. I'll come back to that because there's quite a lot there already, and particularly that kind of civic dimension. But I wonder whether I could just bring in someone from a very different context, from the parish context, and that's Sarah, who's in a school context. So say a little bit about yourself, Sarah, and how you've responded at your school.
Yeah, I'm Sarah, and I'm principal at Kingsland Church of England Academy in Stoke-on-Trent, and we responded on Friday morning after the news was shared on Thursday evening with the whole school worship to celebrate Her Majesty's life. We did that whole school, and then children completed activities in the classroom where they reflected on what the Queen had meant for them. Because as a school earlier in the year, obviously in June, we'd done big celebrations and had a week of celebrations around the Platinum Jubilee. So the children were all aware of who the Queen is and the significance to our country. And also it being a Church of England school, we made that clear to the children that they're significant for us as a school. We've also set up a prayer area in school where children can write prayers, and we've set up in our main entrance, we've got our Lantern Cafe, and in our main entrance we've set up a prayer area for parents and our community, and also a condolences book, which again is being well used by people.
Thank you, Sarah. And finally, David from Stoke-on-Trent and Shifnal now to Walsall. Tell us where you are and what you're up to and what you've been doing over the past few days as response.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm the vicar at St Thomas's Church in Aldridge, and we're not a particularly civic context at all. We're probably quite the opposite of Chris's context, and so it was quite interesting for us to be in a situation where we actually went quite traditional and liturgical. We felt that was something that this was an extraordinary event, and so we needed to do something that was a bit different. So we opened the church Thursday evening. We had some quiet music playing, some candles to light, which again is quite out of our context. And we didn't have lots of people, but we had a steady stream of small numbers from our surrounding estate that came and sat and drank coffee and had a chat and lit some candles. And then on Friday night, we had a commemoration service that was, again, out of our comfort zone, quite liturgical, quite traditional, with hymns, which might not be what you expect at St Thomas's Church. That's not what we'd normally do on a Sunday, but we felt like this was an event that had to be marked. It was right to mark it like that, and that was appreciated in our context. And then on Sunday, we get quite a lot of children, and we had for example, a group on Sunday afternoon called Wonderfully Messy Church, which is for children with additional. But we tweaked that a bit, so we had a couple of sensory prayer stations about Her Majesty, and that was so that different ages and abilities could access a way of remembering and celebrating her life.
Thank you, Chris. You said that you've had hundreds through, and you mentioned the kind of civic dimension. But who are the other? Who make up that hundreds of people have been coming to Shifnal Church?
Yeah, I think Shropshire's quite a traditional area, so a high proportion of the local people do turn out for civic events and for Remembrance Day. Lots of people I would remember from the Remembrance Parade. Lots of people we see at the more formal civic services were coming out for that. But we were recognising folks from Messy Church, folks that were linked with us on the margins. Lots of people who I didn't recognise at all, but who've been moved on this occasion to come. And working so closely with the town council was important because they directed everything to the church, which was really helpful. And we've been working very closely with them. And in fact, I'd say that both through COVID and now, these events have enabled us to draw very close to our civic leaders and to work with them.
Which is really encouraging, but it, as you rightly say, it's a consequence of a relationship that's been building over time, and it's great that they see this as the natural place, really. And that won't be true of every context. I mean, David, you said that it's somewhat different in your situation where you haven't got that civic dimension. So who have you found yourself kind of talking to, ministering to in the past few years?
For us, it's often been the families that are on the, I don't like to use the phrase margins of church, but those families that come to our toddler groups and come to our kind of all-in services. We've been finding them coming along. I think because they know that all ages are welcome, so it won't be sitting in silence if your kid's making a noise or causing a bit of holy mayhem. That's okay. Usually it's mine doing that anyway, so it's all good. And I think that's been important. And it's been people that have been asking those really big questions about life, and we've had time to have some really good conversations about what is death. We never talk about it, do we? And all of a sudden it's in front of us, it's all over our TV screens, and the kind of postmodern view is, well, you only live once, so eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But if society really thinks that, why have we got this outpouring of grief and looking for hope? That they don't quite marry up, I don't think. So that's led to some really interesting, quite deep conversations.
It has been really fascinating the way this has opened up all sorts of conversations. I mean, Sarah, we've mentioned the children, of course, and they're the priority and the primary concern in a school like yours. But I do know that your school is very integrated with the local community, and there's a kind of wider school community there. I mean, have you had much to do with parents and others on this kind of subject?
Yeah, we've been linking with our parish church. So we've shared on our social media and with all of our parents at school how they can engage with the parish churches that have been open for books of condolences and prayer times and so on. But I think as well, we've also shared with our parents the things that we're doing in school. So we've shared, I've written a letter to the parents and shared with them that these opportunities are there for prayer, and parents are engaging with that in our cafe. And also that the children we've done 2 worships again this week which are focused on Her Majesty the Queen, and we will do another whole school worship on Tuesday after the state funeral on Monday, bringing the whole school together to again share with the children. So children are asking those questions about what happens, and it's also, we're finding that our pastoral team and our chaplain are ministering to some children who it's bringing back recent bereavements for, so we're supporting them and ministering to them in that way.
Chris, have you spotted this phenomenon of people saying, it's almost like my mum, I've heard this, that my mum's died again, or it brings back my own gran who was just, have you had that kind of conversation?
Very much so, and we focused on that on Sunday as well, just how every death that we've experienced is touched by a big prominent death, and that one of the things we've tried, we had an opportunity for people to have the laying on of hands for healing, in the service as a pointer because of that, really. So I think it's very true that it's touching deep wells of emotion within people. Yeah.
I just encountered someone in one of our churches who was there to see the vicar because her mother had died, and I did a brief conversation with her, and she was saying how she's a great royalist and very sad at the death of the Queen, but also a little bit angry because her mother's death and her grief had all got sort of tangled up now with the kind of national mourning, and I think we do have to be sensitive to that sort of thing, don't we? It's complex for people.
We had a dear lady in our church who loves the Lord died an hour before the Queen was reported to have passed away, and that led to some not tricky conversations but some deep conversations, and I think for maybe some members of the family there was a sense of yes, it's really sad the Queen has passed away, but what about my mum? And that's the kind of tension that you're holding, isn't it? And we come to those conversations acknowledging that grief, but also saying, look, we worship a God who holds the keys of death and hell, who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we're seeing 3 adult baptisms on this Sunday morning. And so it's this strange thing. On one side, we're walking through grief with people, and then at the same time, we're celebrating the goodness of God that we're seeing. It's not easy at all.
Yeah, and it's been a little bit like that anyway, because we've had this kind of curious celebration that there's a new king has acceded to the throne at the same, so we don't quite know whether our flag should be half-mast or full-mast or whatever because of that kind of ambiguity. There is quite a lot of that about at the moment. Chris, do you, as a minister, what do you find yourself reflecting on in terms of what this says about faith and about, I guess, the faith of those you encounter, both within and beyond the life of the church?
Well, very definitely, as Dave mentioned, that the opportunity to talk about death is something obviously we do at funerals, but I think it's been really important to talk about death in the main service and just look at it straight, and to talk about the promise of eternal life, and to imagine what that might mean for each of us. So it's been really important, I think, to allow our own mortality to be something that we reflect on. But also, when somebody like Her Majesty the Queen has lived such a transparently faithful life, that's something to be celebrated. And the confidence, again, with which we can say, may she rest in peace and rise in glory.
And explaining all this to children, Sarah, as we know, there's a lot of this will be outside of their experience. Some will have experienced a bereavement, but many will not. And death is a kind of unknown and perhaps a rather scary subject for them. I mean, you talked about the chaplain and others having to kind of talk to people about. I mean, how do you talk about death to children in a context like this?
We just answer children's questions. So we're using this as an opportunity to reflect that our Queen was a very faithful leader and she was a servant leader. And we're encouraging our children to understand that, and also to look at the hope of the future and use it as an opportunity to share that hope with the children and to honestly answer any questions that they come up with. So we're not kind of talking about it openly. We're just kind of saying to those children that do ask questions from the activities that we're putting on, we're honestly answering them, and our chaplain and pastoral team are supporting any children that is raised particular issues from their own bereavement and things. And children, when they're young, the bereavement might only have been the pet, that's their only bereavement so far in their little lives. So for again, we're drawing the comparisons with that and how important that is for them to reflect, and children are asking, can we write some prayers and so on, which is what we're facilitating and doing with our children.
Oh, well, thank you for all you're doing there, Sarah. It's a really important ministry. Just finally, David, I mean, I am conscious of, Chris alluded to this, the kind of personal, transparent faith of the Queen. I mean, she made no secret of her Christian faith. And we've had that public figure at the very heart of our national life with such an explicit Christian faith. Is that something that you've kind of encountered in terms of the conversation you've had with people? People sort of perhaps wondering whether there might be something in it. What a wonderful person the Queen was, and she was a wonderful Christian.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting that I don't think the media have capitalised on it as much as, almost every public declaration the Queen made pointed to Jesus as Lord. And yet I haven't seen that proportion of the BBC haven't, I don't think, particularly capitalised on that. I'm sure that there's a lot of reasons for that. But when I've spoken to people who wouldn't call themselves Christians, and we had some quotes going around on the screen in our church of quotes from the Queen, and she's talking of, she said, one of the ones she said was, I believe in God, he is steadfast, he has always been faithful. I mean, these are amazing. She was such an evangelist, such a preacher, so many people listened to her. And yet there's still been a sense of, oh, okay, she really was a Christian. She wasn't just this person that went to church. She loved Jesus, and there was something, and that has certainly led to a lot of good conversations. And it's made sermon writing a bit easier because she's written half my sermons for me over the last week. So I'm very grateful to Her Majesty for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and if our culture finds it difficult to talk about death, it seems also it finds it difficult to talk about faith, doesn't it? But Queen has helped us with that last thing, at least, to show how it's possible to be a public figure in that way, and a person of great integrity, and also a person of deep faith. We need to wrap up now. Thank you to all our panelists, not least for all doing, which I'm conscious that for many of us, particularly I'm thinking now of obviously principals and head teachers, but certainly for parish clergy, it does seem like one kind of national event has succeeded another, and that brings its own pressures. But I'm very grateful for all you've been doing and for participating in this one-off special ministry shift. And thank you to all those who have watched, and God bless you all.